Hey, welcome to another writing live stream. Uh, I'm Bryan Young, obviously, otherwise, you wouldn't be watching this if you had no idea who I was. And if you do have no idea who I am, that's okay. You don't need to. I promise I won't lead you astray. So, the first question I had today is really sort of at the heart of the artist versus the um, the business person aspect of writing. At what point do you stop being an artist and do things in your manuscript to please a reader? And I'm a big believer in that um, you need to give readers what they need, not necessarily what they want. And sometimes those can be two different things. They might not know they need something, but ultimately you need to be in control of what it is that you're telling people. But I think it's important to know how your words are going to react with an audience. So to say the audience doesn't matter, I think is a little short sighted personally. I think the audience does matter because what you're doing is you're taking a jumble of letters and a jumble of punctuation marks and trying to communicate ideas and feelings in their head. And if they're not responding to it, if they don't like it, if it's not working, if the ideas that you're trying to communicate aren't communicating to them, you're not being an artist. Um, you're just being a bad writer. If you are communicating these things to them and it's causing them feelings that they dislike, that is being an artist. But if you're not doing any of those things, then you're really in trouble. Um, I like to tell people when they're revising, like, if I didn't get the imagery that you as a writer are trying to put in my head, that's not a failure on my part. That's a failure on the part of the writing. And that's something I take personally into the when I'm doing revisions, thinking about every line, thinking about what is the image, what is the feeling, what is the sense that this is going to put in the head of a reader. I think if you don't think about the readers, then I'm not sure what you're writing for, because writing is a very it's like a two-way street, right? What's the point of me creating a story to communicate to other people if I don't care how other people are going to consume it or understand it or react to it? So, but I think in the broader sense, the question also kind of comes up where I would like to do this thing, but it might be less commercial. And personally, I think commercial considerations aren't something that you need to be worrying too much about when you're writing your manuscript, especially in the first draft. Write the draft you want. And then you need to come to terms with the idea that, an agent or a publisher might not find that your idea of the story is as saleable to them as it is to you. When I was putting my first book together, Mike Stackpole told me, my first book is called Lost at the Con, and it was about a drunken political journalist who covers a comic book convention against his will. And I was getting ready to send it out to publishers, and Mike said, you're not going to find a publisher that's going to pick that up. You might as well put it out on your own. And I said, well, why? I think it's great. And he's like, here's the thing, they don't know how to sell it. It's not that it's not good. It's not that they'll tell you it's not commercial because they don't know what shelf to put it on. But you're going to conventions, you're hand selling this book, you're talking to people in that culture who would like that book, and you're the right person to sell it. It's commercial from your perspective. And I sold a lot of copies of that book because Mike convinced me that putting it out on my own was the right thing. Now, if I would have taken it to a publisher, they might have said, well, this isn't commercial, you need to change this or change that. And maybe it would have made me more money, or maybe it would have made me maybe it would have made a different book, maybe it would have made a better book, but it wasn't the book I necessarily wanted to write. I'm still reasonably proud of Lost at the Con. And it was the book I wanted to put out. It was the book I wanted to write, and it was the story I wanted to tell. Um, so, but if I were to write, I've got a manuscript now that I'm working on revising, my epic fantasy, and it has a female lead, and people are saying, well, they don't like female leads in epic fantasy, and I went to a publisher, and the publisher said, listen, we like this, but we need you to change the lead from a female to a male. I would say absolutely not, because that completely undermines the story that I have, and that part of my artistic intent of it is to provide better representation in a genre that has that needs more. Um, so it's definitely a balancing act you need to take. You need to know where you're going to divide those lines between artistic and commercial and your intent. And sometimes they are. If maybe if it were the other way around, if they came to me and said, hey, we want you to increase your representation, can you work on that? Maybe I would. But decreasing it would certainly be a no-go for me. So we've got lots of people in here right now. If you do have any questions, feel free to type them in there. I'll see them and answer them. If not, I can just keep talking about what's been going on with my writing, since the one question I had, I kind of feel like I've answered. We still have some time left. I've got some really interesting things coming up, and I'm working. Talking a little bit about the revision process. I mentioned that epic fantasy book that I'm revising, and it's been a challenge. It's the largest book I've ever written. It's about 100. It's almost 140,000 words, and it's just. I've written 2 books since I wrote it, actually, too. I don't know how many of you keep up with my blog, but the point of my last, sort of writing blog post was that I feel like you need to write a novel in between revisions. So my process is usually write a novel, write another novel, revise that first novel, and then keep going, and then write another novel, and then revise that last one again. And I actually managed to squeeze in 2 novels before this one, so a lot more of the stories kind of left my head. And so taking it all in and soaking it all in has been really interesting, but there's so much good stuff in there. But the way I've been doing it, I printed it all out, so it's a stack of papers this big, and have been attacking it with green pen. I read James Gunn actually said that he likes revising in green pen because red has so many negative connotations to it, and it reminds him so much of school, and it seems so negative, so that he likes to do his revisions in green. And personally, I always like revising in colors anyway, because it's easier to see against the offset of the black type. And so I got a pen, a fountain pen named Oathbreaker, and got some really nice green ink, and have been attacking the manuscript that way. And it's I think it's going to be a fun book. I think it's going to be a really fun book. So like I said, we still have some time to answer questions. I can talk about some of the other stuff I've got coming up. I've been doing a lot of writing for a lot of different outlets recently. Fantasy Flight Games is probably the most recent. Well, that's less interesting. Bryce has a question now. So, I just use green. So he wants to know red for stuff you need to fix and green for stuff you're kind of proud of. So I don't use red at all in the revisions. Someone else is actually going through, a different editor's going through the manuscript in red. And so part of that is so we can just differentiate each other's notes. My notes, which are clearly the most important because they're mine, are in green, and I'm kind of going through it first. So the different colors of people. So I've got three people going through my one copy, and one of them's going to be in blue, mine is in green, and others in red. So it's not, um, it's not, it's not color coded the way maybe you'd expect, but it's all sort of in that same proofreading shorthand, if that makes sense. But back to the Fantasy Flight thing. I've got some new pieces coming out, like some new ways to mix X-wing, the X-wing miniatures game with the role-playing game, which should be a lot of fun. I really love writing stuff about role-playing games, and board games in general. They are a lot of fun to me, and I don't think enough people care about them as much as I do. So I'm really excited to be able to dive into those worlds. My first piece, if you guys haven't seen it, was about how you can incorporate characters like Ahsoka Tano into your Age of Rebellion games, which I think is a lot of fun. I think Ahsoka Tano from Clone Wars and from Rebels is probably one of the most fascinating characters to come out of Star Wars. And if you just watch all of her episodes, you've got a really, really interesting and rich character arc. I think there's so much learning just about storytelling that can be done in watching Clone Wars and Star Wars in general. But yeah, that's it. But I'm a Star Wars guy, so maybe one day we'll kind of get into that some more. If you are interested to hear me talk more about Star Wars, there's always the Full of Sith podcast, which you can go check that out, where I talk at length with a couple of co-hosts, Mike Pilot and Amy Radcliffe, and we just talk about Star Wars every week, and it's one of the best times I have. That's about it, unless there's any last minute questions. I think we're about out of time. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this answered some questions for you. If you're interested in finding more about my writing, you can follow me on Twitter at Swankmatron, or follow my blog at bryanyoungfiction.com, or buy my books on Amazon, and you can find me well enough, because if you're watching this, you have my name and you know how to spell it and everything. So until next time, keep writing.